going to tell us about his experiences in World War II, his life, his family, and how he got along in the service. So, Odie, it's up to you now, and we're going to let you tell us all about it.
Real good.
Yep. Gosh, let's start out with the easy stuff. What's your name?
My name is Otzenberger. I'm a native of Sterling, born and raised here.
When were you born?
February 22nd, 1920.
Attaboy. Okay. So you were raised here?
I've been raised here, went to school here.
Okay, you went through high school here?
Oh, yes.
And which school did you go to here? Public school or Catholic? Public school, okay. Yeah. And so how did you get in the service?
Well, that kind of has a long story. I had a job working downtown, and the Navy recruiter right across the street from me in the post office building came over and visited with me, and we got to be pretty close friends. Went pheasant hunting and all that kind of thing.
Really?
But he was a chief electrician, and that fascinated me because I was interested in electricity and electrical equipment. So he gave me a brief down of his experiences in the Navy, and that appealed to me all the more.
What year was that?
That would have been starting about 1940, somewhere in there.
1940. So
about then.
Mm-hmm.
And then all this manufacturing and building of military equipment, this sort of thing. There was various aircraft plants sprung up around Los Angeles area, amongst others. And two friends of mine were working in these plants, telling me how much fun it was and what good money they were earning in this. So I and a friend got in a car and we drove straight through to Los Angeles. We left one morning and got there the next morning. And I started making the rounds to the various plants seeking employment. First question is, you'll have to take a little examination. Oh, fine. They gave me a test that I thought sure a third grader could pass, and turned it in, and I asked the person at the desk, when do I check back? Oh, in about a week. I thought, now wait a minute, a week? So I went over to the next plant. Same acceptance over there. And all they were doing was giving me the runaround because my draft status was 1A. And they were not, at that time, hiring 1A people. But instead of telling me this, see, they give me the runaround. So then my pockets were getting a little empty, and I was getting a little hungry, so I got a job with Atlantic Richfield to kind of get acclimated there. And local draft board was just down the street a short distance, a branch office. And of course I had to report in there. So I stuck my head in the door and every now and then and say hi. Opened the door one day and the guy said, we was just gonna call you. I said, what was you gonna call me? He said, you tell your employer to find a replacement in a 2-week period here. Said you can be there 2 more weeks.
Wow.
So I had a day off every week, and the next day happened to be my day off. I just grabbed a trolley car and went downtown to the naval station down there and enlisted. And at the time, all their facilities were full, so they put me on what they called an inactive status. Now that was, let's see, that was in February of 1942 when I signed up.
And how old were you then? About?
22.
22, okay.
Pardon, 20.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, the guy just says, well, if you leave town or anything, just keep in touch, and so we'll have a phone number or something so we can get a hold of you. And it wasn't till let's see, about 23rd of March, I think, when I got the call to report in. They had me on inactive status all this time, and they immediately sent me to the training station in San Diego, and that's where I got my boot camp training. And while I was there, I learned about the different schools they had on the base. They had a nice electrical school. I thought, now, this chief I'm talking about that I had been friended, his name was Joe Zollner, and Joe said, now, anytime you get a chance, get first in line. So we lined up one morning for calling of attendance muster, or whatever you call it, and the chief that was in charge at the time said, the electrical school over here just graduated a class. Is there anybody in the group, there was 150 of us, that might be interested in going to electrical school? Well, I about ran over the two guys in front of me getting to the front line. So I got enrolled in their electrical school, and it was very, very basic. Met a lot of nice people, and another sailor and I that kind of had the same interests, sort of just in a friendly way, got to bumping heads to see who could get to the top of the class. But we both graduated with a pretty good grade, and upon graduation there, we were called to the office, and the lieutenant that was in charge of the school said that there was an opening across the bay at the destroyer base, that we could get some additional schooling. Well, we jumped at that chance. They moved us immediately to the destroyer base, and they called it the Fleet Fire Control School. What we were studying was the computer, the instrument that aims and elevates the big guns on the heavier ships like cruisers, battleships, and this sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
An instrument, a little larger than an ordinary household dryer or washing machine, and it had levers and buttons and stuff all over it, and gauges. You could reach over to one side and just barely touch the handle on a crank and look on the other side and watch a meter, and that hand on that meter would be moving. And I later had a man in my group that worked in a factory that made parts for these things, and he said 1/10,000th of an inch was maximum tolerance. If their tolerance got any more than that, they had to throw it away and make another one.
Junk them, huh?
So it was a very sensitive machine. We had a Lieutenant J.G. and a Chief Petty Officer as our instructors, and those guys were like our modern, well, I don't know what kind of a machine you'd call it, but they had this machine just printed in their brain, and they could answer any question you asked, and they could ask questions we couldn't answer. So it was a fascinating class. And after graduating from that class,
Well, that machine was designed to aim the guns and so
Yes.
forth, at trajectory and that sort of
on
thing?
your larger ships where they had the bigger guns.
Right, okay.
And you end up with train and elevation as the two functions. But there's so many factors go into that. You have to know, for instance, you have to know your target's direction, his speed, the wind speed, and other factors to determine the target's position. And then the ship you're on has the same functions. Pitch, roll, yaw, which is a combination, have to be cranked in all at the same time, plus your direction, wind speed, all these factors. even down to the trunnion, which is the big turntable that the gun pivots on. They are accurately turned on a big lathe assembly, but still differences in metal hardness and this can cause slight variations. And all these little errors had to be cranked into this machine.
Mm-hmm.
But example, like the USS North Carolina, her 16-inch guns, which shot a projectile that weighed about 2,300 pounds with 540 pounds of powder behind it, good for accuracy at 20 miles. And another example would be the USS Missouri, the Mighty Mo. Her accuracy point was 23 miles, and she shot a 2,700 weight projectile.
Wow.
And this is with accuracy, not maximum distance. If they wanted to hit knock the chimney off a building, that's what they would shoot at that distance. And it was just fascinating to see these things work, really.
Yeah, I bet.
But I enjoyed the schooling, and upon graduating from this class on the computer, I was called back to San Diego's Naval Training Station, and the lieutenant that was in charge of the school met me at the door one morning, and he said, come upstairs with me. He took me upstairs and took me down the hall and to a door, and he said, you'll be in here today. I walked in, and here's this elderly chief petty officer that had been my instructor when I went through the school. And I thought, well, maybe I'm supposed to just...
How old was an elderly chief petty officer?
Well, he was probably in his 60s at least.
Oh, was he?
He would have had at least four hitches in the Navy.
Yeah.
You know, and of course he was familiar with the older ships that didn't have too much on them electrically. And so the classes were quite basic. Anyway, a short time after that, the lieutenant met me at the door. He takes me upstairs and he says, you'll be in this door today. I opened the door, and what do you know? I'm the only one in there. Well, the light finally came on. I'm supposed to be the instructor, see. So that's when I started. And then a few minutes later, a class of 30 men marched in. That was my start. And I'd have the class for 2 weeks in my session, and then they would go to another room, and every 2 weeks I got a new class. It soon got up to 60 men to a class instead of 30. Well, I couldn't even remember all the names, you know. I mean, I had the problem just getting the classwork. I had to make up my own lecture series, diagrams, whatever I was doing at the blackboard, and write up my own test papers and grade them.
Wow, is that right?
So it kept me pretty busy.
Oh yeah, I bet.
But the big thing that scared me, I was getting students that were second-year college. And so we had a very nice library about 2 blocks or so from the school. I would put that library to bed at midnight every night for about almost 2 months. Knowlton's Electrical Engineer's Handbook, 1,200 pages, had the subject of electricity divided into its separate phases, which is about 7, and that was my instructor. I studied much harder there than I would had I been going to college to get that same knowledge, you know. But I got to where I could answer their questions, and that's what I was there for. So I think getting some younger men in there that were really interested might have been an improvement in the school. And this went on for just about 2.5 years.
Wow, you instructed all that time.
Yeah.
Huh?
So I had a lot of people go through my class, And it was embarrassing because in later years or later times after that, maybe I'd see somebody in Manila or Honolulu or someplace. Hi, Otis. I couldn't recall their name. The face
not.
would be familiar, but I couldn't put a name to it. I'd have to ask him.
You knew he was an electrician's mate or something.
That's right.
Well, that's good. So you did that for, how long did you do that for?
2.5 years.
2.5 years. So then what happened to you?
Well, at that point in time, see, the progress in the war in the Pacific was moving right along, and they were building these, they called them Liberty ships, built in Richmond, California, which is just across the bay from San Francisco. And they would have as many as 3 on the ways at the pier under construction at one time. And I got assigned to a crew of one of these vessels. The hull basically was completed, but all the finished work and interior construction was just being worked on. So my who was to be my chief warrant officer, the head of my E division, came over one morning and he said, "Otis, I'm going to move you to the shipyard." Oh, hey, that'll be fun. So he said, "You will live in their quarters, eat in their dining room, and all you need to do every morning at 8 o'clock is come up the gangway with a tablet and a pen or a pencil and just walk that ship, just every place you can go on that vessel, and write down anything that you see that is not complete or doesn't look to you like it was done properly, like a bad weld or a nut left off or a bolt or a gasket left out of a box lid, a watertight lid or anything like that." So I'd done this for a couple, must have been between 2 and 3 weeks. And
Now, what year would have that been, more or less?
well, this was in 45.
45, okay.
Yeah. Because see, I moved, take it back, yeah, 40, well, actually, it would have been, I believe that would have been actually in 44, in latter part of 44,
Mm-hmm.
because after they got the vessel, what they considered as put together, they had a trial run. The shipyard took it on a run. And my division officer came over one day and he's got a little permit in his hand. He said, "I want you to go on this shakedown with the yard." And he handed me down. I looked around and it says radio operator. And I said, "Wait a minute, I'm not a radio operator." "Oh, that's right. This is just to get you aboard." So I got to go on their shakedown cruise, which was fascinating. They'd run that thing flank speed ahead and then order down flank speed in reverse.
Really
It
crank
just,
it around, huh?
It just felt like they was going to shake it apart. I mean, of course, that was the object, see, make sure it could stand all the necessary stress. And then it went back to the shipyard for some final fittings, and then one morning we had the Navy program to accept the vessel. And then, of course, we took it out on our own shakedown then, so that all the men would know the details and what they were supposed to do.
What were those ships, what did those ships do? Did they cargo or did they,
No,
what were they?
our basic function was to transfer armed units, the fighting men, so to speak. We were a troop transport.
Okay.
And they called them an assault attack ship. And what we would do would be load up an entire division, or whatever they call them, of Army, Marines, or whatever we were sent to get. And then we would be told which island to go to, or what action taking place that we were to sail into. And then when we got organized there and got our orders, we would have, we might have as many as 1,600 men in an armed unit. We'd have all their trucks, tanks, everything they had, just move the whole thing, and all the people. And we had nets made of rope, probably about a foot square weave, and these boats that were tied along the side, the attack boats, they had different designations for different ones, but we'd throw the net over the side, and the men would crawl down the nets into the boats, and then the bigger boats, some were definitely for personnel, and then they had some bigger ones, and where trucks, tanks, and that sort of thing would go in. And when we'd get them loaded one at a time, that boat would go around the ship to the backside where any gunfire from the beach couldn't hit them, and get the boats all loaded, then they'd all go in as a group. And when they started in, a heavy cruiser or a battleship, whatever was available, would lay out beyond us, and they would fire over our heads to the beach. And these shells exploding would warm up the beach for us and kill anything that was there or push them back, so that our men could land with much more safety. And at times, if the light was just right and you were lucky, you'd look up, you'd see these 3 cartridges
Oh, really?
sailing right over you. Fun to watch them.
Yeah, as long as they didn't come down.
Yeah, right. But you figure each one of them weighed over a ton, you know.
Right.
And there was a big cloud of dust and smoke when it hit the beach.
I'll bet.
But that's how we got the men unloaded then.
And what actions were that? Do you remember the names of the actions, or what the?
Oh, we went to so many different islands, I couldn't tell you. The one that probably fascinated me the most was Okinawa, because that was kind of clearing the situation. It was kind of the last area that we had problems with the Japs to get them off, you know, or to get rid of them. And the one maneuver there that really fascinated me, we came in rather late in the evening. We had the ship positioned about the distance we wanted to be from the beach, and we don't know what other vessels were with us. We didn't have that. I didn't have that kind of information, but we got positioned, didn't drop the anchor. We just keeping everything ready to move in case. And as it got a little darker, I felt the ship starting to move, and I thought, this is unusual. We never move without they call down, set sea detail. That was our orders to man our stations. They were backing up without even doing this. And what they done was go on down the beach quite a little ways to another spot. And just before daylight in the morning then, we deployed the men, and we found out that the sister ship that was following us had gone the other direction. And the maneuver was that they had us from aerial observance directly attacking this group of Japs head on. And of course, what they would do is scatter both sideways. But with our vessels having moved, we had them surrounded. And I thought that was the neatest maneuver we ever pulled. It took them really by surprise.
That's good.
But,
so how many of those engagements would you guess you were in on? Were you on 10, 20?
golly, I don't know. It was hard for me to know what was going on. To start with, one of the orders we had when we commissioned the vessel, there'll be no cameras and no diaries.
Oh, really?
So my other thing, having gone to gyro compass school, I'm not sure I mentioned this previously, But I went to Sperry Gyro School in San Francisco while I was waiting on the vessel. And being the only one aboard that was really trained in this instrument, they moved me out of cruise quarters down to what we call the IC room, because it had the gyro compass and our communication center and everything in this one room. So they welded a bunk up on the bunkhead. In fact, they welded two of them up in case I would have an assistant, and brought me two lockers. And
Plugged you in down there.
I
huh?
moved into the IC room.
Is that right?
That was my home from there on. And this was handy. And in fact, when they come into the second locker, I said, well, now I'll need one more. And the guy looked at me and he said, well, what do you want with three of them? I said, we need a place to put our tools and some of these phones and things that we have to work on. Well, that's a good idea. So he brought me a third locker. And when I got a chance to go to a supply vessel, I got some pieces of steel and built me a little workbench in the corner, got that welded up. So I was at home from then on in the gyro compass room.
That was it. Huh?
And of course the compass, very sensitive instrument, and time to time they would send somebody down or call down on the phone and have me check the reading on my compass card with the magnetic compasses
On the bridge, huh?
on the bridge, see,
Yeah.
to make sure everything was reading the same. And that also had the fire alarm system panel in that room. Plus I had a motor generator set to supply alternating current to the bridge for radio and this type of thing. Now another thing I didn't mention, that these ships were practically all direct current, because at that time they had not yet developed an AC motor that was practical for variable speed. And in handling this heavy equipment with these big booms and everything, they had to be able to control the speed and go forward, reverse, and this type of thing on these big windlasses that hoisted the things in and out. And that in itself was fascinating. But I probably had a better knowledge of DC at that time than anybody in the school I went through or any of those instructors that I worked with, because they didn't have that experience on the older vessels.
Yeah, that hands-on stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we had three large generators, about 9 kWs, 9, more than that. I don't remember what it was, 90 something, but they were big DC generators, 3 of them. And I could put one on the line, or I could put as many as 3 at a time on the board to handle the load. And that in itself was an interesting feature. Plus our ships had what we called a degaussing cable. Now the degaussing cable started midships in the engine room where the generators were, went forward to the bow, back around the ship and up to the switchboard. One cable, and this thing was probably, a good inch or more in diameter. Then there was a second cable that went from the switchboard to the bow and back just halfway. So we had, you might say, 2 going forward and 1 going aft. And the function of these cables was to carry a certain amount of direct current to create a magnetic field around these cables that would compensate for the distortion of the Earth's magnetic field as we move through the water in different directions.
Oh, wow.
Because they had these, the Japs had these mines that were magnetic sensitive, and anything that changed that magnetic field would detonate the
Set
mine.
'em off, huh?
So you didn't have to hit the mine. You just go too close to it and it would detonate it. So this degaussing cable then neutralized that effect, and we never had a problem,
Wow.
which was encouraging.
That's
But,
a clever technique or thing.
That was a good feature to put on those vessels.
Yeah, right.
Because we would haul, like I mentioned, anywhere from just a few men up to about 1,600 at one time. And then we had 450 crew members. So we had to be pretty sensitive as to safety
Oh yeah.
when we were loaded.
Oh yeah.
It was interesting. It was fascinating. And of course, we endured a lot of air raids and this type of thing. And I don't know where the signals came from or anything, but just any time, day or night, they'd say, "Man your stations." They had sensed an aircraft somewhere that wasn't U.S. craft. And some of those were just reconnaissance planes trying to locate something for these kamikaze pilots to dive on, see.
Right.
And that was another thing. You might go 3 or as much as 4 days and not have more than 2 hours sleep in a night, because you wouldn't any more than secure from one alert, there'd be another one. And it just went on that way for a while. That wasn't always those conditions, but at times it was.
Yeah, that'd be hair raising.
And
huh?
that kind of got your attention.
Oh yeah.
And then on these times, you didn't know how long you was going to be up and on the alert. You had to do something to keep awake. So I scavenged a fired 5-inch round. We had a 5-inch on the tail end of the ship and a quad 40 on the front, and then others around the sides. But after firing one day, I hurried to the fantail and picked me up one of those 5-inch shells, beautiful brass, and took it up to my IC room, and the wing on this little P-38 here, which I call it, sometimes I call it my P-50 because it's mounted on a 50 caliber, but all the flat surfaces here were cut from the metal out of one of those 5-inch shells. And then
Ron.
well, shortly after our 5-inch had been firing, I went aft and grabbed an empty 5-inch case and took it up to my IC room, and all the flat material in this little model here was cut from one of those shells by flattening a metal out. And then the fuselage here of the so-called engine compartments are 50 caliber tracer bullets. They're longer than this standard ball bullet. And I had to clean the tracer powder out of it so they wouldn't be dangerous while I was soldering. And the little air scoops on the side are 30 caliber ball rounds that I could just melt the lead out of. And then the nose on which would be the fuselage here is a 45 caliber pistol bullet. And they're just kind of assembled to sort of look kind of like a P-38. And then the cartridge here that it's mounted on is a complete 50 caliber cartridge. But cutting these little things out and messing with that type of thing, I had to sit there with the phones on and keep them going to sleep for one thing. I'd be cutting out parts of my little airplane, see, and that went on for a while.
That is really nice, Odie. That is really nice.
I got a kick out of it.
Yeah.
But,
so you remained as a down in the IC area, is that correct?
yes.
And that was for till you terminated the time you served, or what happened then?
No, well, that was where I was billeted on the ship, And my duties were varied. I ended up being well, most of the time I was a senior petty officer in my division. We started out with 15 men and ended up with 11. So it kept my crew busy in as much as all the equipment on the ship was electrically operated, except for 2 bilge pumps down in the keel. But there was always something to do. And our telephone system was what they call a sound-powered system. The voice generated the electricity to transmit the signal, and these sets sometimes would get wet or damaged, and I always had several of them at the end of my desk there waiting to be repaired or working on them. And then the radioman up in the bridge there somehow would blow a fuse once in a while. But my fuse panel that served that area had a little pilot light on each one of these fuses. And when I'd see that little light come on, I knew the fuse was out, so I'd grab a new fuse and put it in there without even talking to them. And we'd always have an inspection on Saturday, the captain and 1 or 2 other officers usually. And he was really a gentleman. H.G. Davis was his name, and he would ask me questions. He'd ask me about the fire alarm panel and the switchboard and different questions about the compass or whatever come to mind. Very nice man to talk to. And then let's see, what else do we have going there? The outboard equipment that we had, like if there was, say we'd been attacked with a bomber and he destroyed a lot of our equipment, we had an emergency set under the 5-inch gun aft in a little compartment back there. And we had an emergency generator, telephones, and compass, magnetic compass, so that if our main ones got destroyed, we could still navigate with that equipment. Mm-hmm. And one day they were firing and they called down to the IC room and said, something's wrong. Our gyro sight isn't working on the 5-inch. Well, I had, being my level, being usually below waterline, depending on how we were loaded, I had to open 2 latched doors, hatches they call them, to get to the next level and to get on the main deck so I could run aft. And I got back to where I had the last protection there was as a barrier, and this 5-inch had a terrific concussion, you know, when that shell came out of that barrel. It was a terrible shock wave there. And I tried to time it so that I could run from there to the door into the control room under the gun before he fired the next shell. Well, what I didn't anticipate, he started training, and he trained the gun to the left, and by the time I got to the door, the gun barrel's pointing right out here. And it just about tore the pants right off my legs. Mouth wide open so it wouldn't break my eardrums. And then I got inside that little door and checked his problem in there. But I learned to be more wary of that gun after that. I'd never been that close to it before.
When it went off, yeah.
When it was firing.
Yeah. You're lucky it didn't pop your ears and stuff.
Another occasion we had one twin engine. The Japs had some twin engine planes that carried a pretty devastating load. And this guy was going to dive on the stern end of the vessel. But the gunner was lucky on the 5-inch and put a shell in him and just blew that plane apart, and the tail section lit right just under the stern of the vessel. So he didn't hurt us any. And it couldn't have been, I'd say maybe somewhere 3 to 4 minutes later, another one was a single engine job. He started in on the bow of the ship, just diving right down towards us. and we had a quad 40, which is 4 barrels of 40 millimeter, and they got him down before he got to us. That was our two closest attacks that we know of. There was others, but a lot of times it would be 2 vessels firing at the same plane, and when he went down, then each plane would get credit for a half a kill. See?
Yeah.
So we'd have the 2 full little emblems painted up there on the stack, and then the little halves, you know. We also had smoke generators at the first part of the dangerous area, so to speak. And these smoke generators would put up a big cloud, and if 2 or 3 vessels could get fairly close together and each one ignite their smoke generator, it created a cloud so the guys in the sky couldn't differentiate that between a regular cloud, and he couldn't see the vessels. And that got us out of a lot of scrapes. But we did the ship I was on was USS Montrose, APA 212, and the only actual casualties we had was one man had some shrapnel in a shoulder, and then one of the boys that we brought back from the beach from one of the invasions that we pulled, he had a wound in his buttocks that wasn't serious, so to speak. I mean, you know, it would heal up. And we had a pretty good hospital area on our ship, something like a 5-bed unit. Mm-hmm. And the pharmacist mates that worked with the doctors, they got to be pretty good friends of mine. They'd come down to, one of them in particular, come down to the IC room. He was supposed to be their x-ray technician. Well, we had a portable x-ray unit, and they were a little leery about operating this thing. So when they'd get a patient needed an x-ray, they'd come down and say, "Oh, you come and do this x-ray for us?" So I'd go up and set up the x-ray machine and do everything but push the timer button. I didn't know, you know, I didn't know any part of that. But I'd have it all set up, and we'd x-ray the guy, and then later he'd either bring the pictures down or I'd go back up to see him, you know. And that was fascinating.
Had you ever done anything like that?
No, not before.
No, that's what I mean.
No, not before. And then we had one other sailor that had his leg crushed right at the knee, a very bad wound, and we were in convoy at the time. We were not permitted to leave convoy. The water was pretty rough, and of course everything's lights out, you know. I mean, nothing could have any lights on it. The hospital ship would lay out quite some distance from us, and by the time we got to a point where we could, one night we called the hospital ship and told them we had to get a patient on there. Gangrene was starting to show up, and that was another experience. They strapped him in one of these metal baskets, got out the old 45-70 and shot a pin with a line on it across the hospital ship. They grab that line and pull it in, and that pulls a bigger line in. And the third line that come in then was a good heavy rope, so that we could take a turn on our capstan to keep the tension on the rope. And the 2 ships traveling side by side, we had to keep that rope just tight enough so that he didn't dare hit the water.
Drop in the
See,
brink, yeah.
Especially when he got out in the middle there. But we got him aboard the hospital ship, and they eventually, I don't know if they amputated a part of his leg there or whether that was done after they transferred him off the hospital ship. But this was done about in the middle of the night under total darkness.
Wow.
And it was pretty cagey because it's hard to see that basket to know how high you had him above the water, you know. But
especially shooting that line, I would think would have been pretty tough too.
well, yeah, of course, when we refueled at sea, we had to do that. We had to shoot a line over to catch the big oil line back to fill our tanks, see. So
You were used to doing that.
the
a
guys
lot.
got pretty used to handling that
Yeah.
that part of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Huh.
That was just some of the interesting things that happened.
Yeah,
on
oh yeah, that's what we
Walloon.
want to know about, things you went through.
So, we had a portable hospital unit on our vessel, and it was so designed that we could unpack it and create, I forget whether it was 10, 12 beds or more, must have been more than that, well, at least 12, up in the forward cruise compartment. We could fold up the bunks and stuff back there and just turn that part of the ship in case we'd come back with a lot of casualties
Sure.
from one of the
Mhm.
assaults on the beach. But we never had to do that, never had to set it up. Our ship, the Montrose, and several other ships, supply vessel, and I don't know what others, got into a little anchorage in a place where we thought we would be safe for a while. And I think we were waiting for advance orders or something, but we got word that there was going to be an air raid again, and we had a full load. We must have had total count, we must have had between 1,800 and 2,000 men aboard. So our ship and the sister ship in Montreal that was commissioned right after us got orders to leave this group and scatter. So we each went our own way. We were in the North China Sea someplace, and I don't know where from there, and we'd run into one of these real bad storms, kind of like hit Louisiana or something of that nature. Terrific winds, no hail, but just terrific winds and at times rain. But the water, I couldn't believe it. It was so rough that when the Montrose would be in a trougher, say to your left, and there'd be a ridge of water, and then the Montreal be in a trougher over here to the right, we couldn't see each other. The two ships would be out of sight down in those troughers. And then when we broke up over the wave, then the ship would have to go down on the other side, and we'd always have to go at an angle, otherwise we'd have just disappeared in the water. And we felt like we was aboard a submarine because the complete bow section of the ship would be in the water when we hit the bottom down there. It'd just come right up, hit the bulkhead in front of the bridge. And it was just, I didn't believe water could get that rough. One day after, I don't know how many days this lasted, must have been at least 3 days, but it started letting up a little, and I had a bad situation up towards the bow, something the storm had done up there. I strapped on my tool belt, went forward, and I'm walking along the edge of the ship holding on to the safety rail, which was a cable, to get to the forecastle, which is an elevated section of the ship. And of course there was about 6 or 7 steps there to go up. And I put my foot on the first step, and I felt the ship going out from under me, so I grabbed the handrails on each side, and I had to hold myself down. The ship was going down faster than I was falling. And when it started back up, I thought it was going to drive my knee right under my chin.
Wow.
Because it was coming up at a terrific speed. I just turned around and made my way back to the IC room and said, I'll fix that later.
Yeah, right. Call me later.
But that's the worst water I've ever seen. It was really a bad one. But we got through it without any casualties or anything that way. So
How long was the ship? I mean, how many?
I think it was about 450 or something. I don't remember the exact measurements, something like that, feet. We had a single 3-blade propeller that was 14 foot in diameter, and it was a turbine drive arrangement, oil fired to create steam, about some 400 and some pounds pressure in the boiler, The first stage of the turbine turned 3,600 RPM. The second stage turned 1,800, and then the steam from there, the discharge from the 1,800 turbine would go back to the boiler. So it just a continuous circulation, and it made a good drive unit because you had real good control over speed. I mean, if you wanted to change the rotation of the propeller just a fraction or whatever, you know, they could ring it down from the bridge and they could adjust the steam to get that.
Slow her up or speed her up, huh?
Yeah, it was a good drive unit, really. The drive shaft, 20 inches in diameter. It was hollow, incidentally, but it was 110 feet long.
Wow, is that
from
right?
From the last turbine back to the screw. Yeah. So that was a lot of hardware there, and the ammunition. Most of our ammunition was stored in the forward part of the vessel, but we had handling equipment that could, you know, relay it wherever we needed it, and that's where I got my ammunition. Being an electrician, I could get into just about any compartment on the vessel, including the officer's freezer, and because there was either light bulbs, diffusing fans, or something of that nature that we had to maintain. So I'd just go down in the ammo lockers and look around, and well, there's a box of 45s been opened, and I get me a couple of these, and then I'm looking for some 50s. Well, those are on a machine gun, but I can take the links off, so I grabbed 2 or 3 of them and go back, and I got something to work with.
Good for you. So then you served the rest of the war on that ship, or till the time of?
Yes, we after we had left Okinawa, we had orders in to move men. It didn't involve gunfire or anything usually, but we made 2 separate runs into Japan with occupational forces, and we started out in a very hot, humid area. I don't know just where we were, but we were running around with practically all our clothes off at times, trying to keep cool. And then all of a sudden, we're looking for our foul weather coats, because as we got away from the equator and up towards the tip of Japan, it was quite a change in temperature.
Yeah.
But we made 2 runs, both into Sasebo, Kyushu, and that's the southwest corner of Japan. And on our first run in, they had towed in a carrier that the American forces had just torn up something terrible, and somehow the ship's command got permission to board that vessel just to see it. And they being short of stature, you had to be real careful. You're walking along and something bung you on the head here.
low bulkheads and stuff like
low
that.
bulkheads. But then that was kind of an advantage to them. They could work an extra deck in the same ship that we didn't have, so,
Yeah.
and get more stuff in
Yeah.
there. But it was just fascinating to see the size of some of the patches they had welded on that ship. It had been brought in 2 or 3 times, damaged to where you wouldn't think it could float, and they got the sucker back out and was using it.
Is that right?
But the town itself, Sasebo, had been bombed with probably, I don't know, maybe 500 pounders or what they used. But large brick buildings would just be a pile of brick. I mean, just like a huge brickyard, 3 or 4 or 5 blocks where the different buildings had just been flattened. But there was a little school there, and how they come to miss it, or probably intentionally, they didn't knock the school down. And we got to watch some ladies, maybe teachers, I don't know, with a class of youngsters, just small kids. And they were taking them from one building to another for part of their schooling, apparently. We got to got to go ashore for just a short time while we were unloading men, and then we had to get back on the ship again. But it was fascinating.
So after that, you did that, and then what did they do? Did they send you home, or what happened then?
Well, we after we got those guys into Japan, then we had orders. We thought we were headed back to the States, and then we got orders to move people various places, and that went on for quite a while. We put a lot of miles on that ship, you know, all the traveling that we done. And I think in March, I believe it was, of '42, I got orders to start inventorying. So I had to inventory all my spare parts boxes and everything. And their thought was that this ship was going to go in mothballs as soon as we got back to the United States with it, which it almost did. Well, I guess it did, actually. In fact, it didn't go in as soon as they thought it would. They had other uses for it. But when the other conflicts like Korea and Vietnam and those type of things came up, they'd pull her out of mothballs and back into service.
Oh, really?
But the armament on it had been changed. We just had the typical combustion type detonators on their shells, you know, the little primer and stuff with a center fire and all that. And they had put on, taken off some of the guns and put rocket launchers on and more modern equipment. And one, I think it was, can't remember where it was, they told me about it, but there was one area, I don't remember if that involved their service in Vietnam or just where they were, but they had a bunch of people that were in severe danger, civilians, on up some river. So the Montrose got orders to go up and evacuate those people, get them out of there before they got killed, see, in this area. And anyway, in the process of doing this, they moved a lot of people, and 7 babies were born on that ship.
Now, so you were inventorying the ship, and when was that date? That was in 1940?
That was in March of 1942.
42.
1942. And I got off the vessel and was discharged at San Pedro. They had a center there where they were handling a lot of this discharge stuff. And I got off the duty period about, they had a point system that they were using. Yeah. And guys got out a little sooner than they expected. So they served 3 years and 10 months active duty.
Right.
Not the inactive duty, but active duty.
Right, I understand. Yeah.
And so I was free to go home. And first thing I'd done was see if I could buy a bus ticket, a train ticket, or any kind of a ticket to get me home. Man, everything was flooded, waiting lists here, everywhere you went. So I stayed in this hotel for several days and finally got passage on a train that got me home. And I stepped on the front step at the house in Sterling on Christmas Day.
Oh, how good.
So that made me pretty happy.
Yeah, it made your family happy, I'm
You
sure.
bet it
Huh?
did. Yeah.
Well, so you finished up in the, now tell us, now you started out as an enlistee, and let's have you tell us a little bit about the ranks you had and stuff. You got some of your things here, Ruth, why don't you?
Well,
ready? Tell us about your medals, your ranks, and everything. Tell us what that means, because...
well, to begin with, when I graduated from the classes at the training station, at the school there, I came out as a third-class electrician.
Okay.
And that was this patch here with the round ball on it.
Okay.
But when they decided to make instructors of us, they said, we can't do that now. We're going to give you a special patch. So they gave us this thing with the little book on it. It's supposed to be an open book.
Makes you a professor.
Evidently. And the interesting thing was, you'd be walking down the street sometimes, especially on a Sunday, and some little kind-hearted ladies would notice that, and they would think you was studying for the ministry. And gee, they'd come up and ask you all kinds of questions. And we thought that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, I bet.
But then there was regulations as to when you could take an exam. You had to have a hold position a certain length of time before you could try for the next step.
Mm-hmm.
And in as much as we had lost so much time, they were pretty lenient with us. It wasn't any time at all. They let me take my examination for second class
yeah.
electrician. And then a short time after that, they said, go ahead and take your first class. So that is the one with the...
Yeah, I'm sure they wouldn't let you do that unless you were pretty proficient.
Well, and then too, like I say, we had lost so much time in the school that we couldn't advance. See, I think they were being kind to us.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's how I advanced in rating. And on the ship, I was first class electrician and the senior petty officer in my division. So my responsibilities were to keep track of what the other guys were doing and
Make sure it was right.
Yeah, just make sure everything's being done that should be done and that kind of thing. The as far as the medals are concerned, I didn't take much interest in medals because at the training station when I was there and in and out of San Diego, there's all these guys coming in, you know, off of ships and what have you. And a lot of them, you could tell by the hash marks on their uniform what their rank was. And some of them would have medals and stuff up here to make their shoulder sag, you know. I mean, they'd go buy them at the secondhand store, wherever they could find them, just to show off. So I didn't take much interest in them.
Okay.
And sometime after I was discharged from the Navy, a friend of mine that had been on a destroyer sent me a package, and these medals were in the package. He had written, being a yeoman, he knew the procedure, so he got the medals for me and sent them to me.
Oh, how
That's
nice.
the only reason I ended up with
Yeah.
it. And now that's with the 4 in the corner. The upper left one here is World War II Victory Medal, and the one beside it on the right is Occupation Service Medal. It has a little bronze star thing on it, which I never did check to see what it meant. And then the lower one on the left side was given for the American campaign, and that I didn't know all the all the details on what it represented and this sort of thing, but I think that was generally the Pacific operation, I think. Anyway, the one on the right is Asiatic Pacific Campaign, and it too has a little star on it. And I kind of wondered if maybe the stars had anything to do with the actual warfare that we were encountered in or something that way.
Battle stars.
Shooting down planes and all this kind of stuff, you know.
I bet it does.
So it may have had some bearing on that. Then the little bar there, it just says Asian. And I've never seen it any place on any of these other placards. I haven't the slightest idea what it meant. But anyway, I got one. The little round black button below my picture on this side is Navy Honorable Discharge, just a buttonhole thing. And the one beside it is the same thing except it's gold instead of black paint. The one on the right here, the little colored one with the red and the yellow and the blue on, that's a combat action ribbon. And this one has a kind of a, it has a kind of a history. The Pentagon at one time had issued a ribbon for action of some Marine group, and later for some Army group. It was a special ribbon, I think, just for those units. And then other people got involved that weren't getting ribbons, and the VFW and some of the men themselves decided that wasn't fair. So they got on the Pentagon people to come up with some kind of ribbon that would be, you know, eligible to all of these guys. And so they finally, I think they created this ribbon in 1961, but it wasn't actually presented. The reason was it was unfunded. That was the Pentagon's reason. And it was finally retroactive. They decided that they would award it to anybody that, you know, had been in active battle and this sort of thing, whatever the regulations were. And it would date back to World War II, the
Okay.
beginning of World War II.
Okay.
So they made them available, and to get the thing was quite a procedure. You had to send a whole bunch of paperwork in, and they had to look up your records, and you hoped your records were still on file somewhere.
Yes, somewhere.
And so eventually I got one. I thought, well, if the Pentagon's going to treat guys like that, I'm going to get one of them.
Absolutely, you deserve it.
So,
No
so I
question
went
about
ahead,
that.
and bless their hearts, they did send it to me. Then the little diamond-shaped patch here with the bird in it, that's honorable discharge patch. And the one thing that I missed and never was able to find was plank owner's ribbon, or patch, I should say. All the guys that were the first men aboard the vessel, you know, to start the operation of that vessel, were declared a plank owner.
A plank owner.
The original. The
I never
original
heard that.
crew,
Is
so,
that right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
they're plank owners.
And there's a designation for that?
There's a designation for it, and I was going to put it right beneath those two buttons there. In fact, it would have been there and the buttons down below it, but I never did find one. They had some kind of a program, an officer, he may have been on the Montrose, in California somewhere, gave some kind of a party for the guys that he could round up there, and he presented each one of them with a plank owner's patch. But I wrote one of them a letter and said, "You got any left?" And he said, "No, we ran out. We didn't have enough of them." So I never did.
This is your ship.
That's the Montrose APA 212. That's the type I was on, and these boats hanging off the side, these big ones, those are the landing craft that we took the men ashore in.
Okay.
And one member of my E division was a coxswain on one of these boats. In addition to being an electrician, they assigned him a boat, and he's the one that had to take them in and bring the boat back.
Wow. That's probably a hot little piece of duty.
It was, really.
Yeah.
Now, those boats were amazing. You've probably heard of the Higgins boat. A man in Louisiana had a business of building flat-bottom boats, and they used them in the shallow waters and swamps and stuff, you know, in that area, especially fishermen and whoever. And somebody got to thinking about one of these and said that would make an ideal landing craft. That design, not big enough, but that design. So some Navy people and whoever that had the authority had a meeting with him, and he demonstrated the boats and how he made them and all this, and he got a contract to start building to their dimensions what he called the Higgins boat, and that's the boat that these things are patterned after.
Oh, those.
And that ramp is fairly square across the front, and it hinges down.
Right.
So when they get to the beach, they can drop that, and the guys drive the tanks and the trucks right off
Landing
onto the beach.
crafts.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and it was a very serviceable design. I mean, they had good luck with them. And the other, one of the other features that they had real good luck with was a flamethrower. Now, in the islands, some of the islands, not all of them, those Japs had tunnels you couldn't believe.
Right.
One tunnel in Okinawa had a complete machine shop in it. And in order to make sure they got everybody out and to empty it, flamethrower was what they used. And if they didn't come out, they'd give them so much warning. If they didn't come out, they'd just
Incinerator.
turn the flamethrower into it. And if they were there, they got cooked. That's just the way it had to be done.
Well, that's impressive, Odie. Boy.
Well, I enjoyed the ship. I enjoyed all the people on it. And people think I was having a picnic. I had my duties like everybody else had,
Right.
but I had a little more variety, I guess. And anything I could learn, I thought, was to my advantage. Some of the guys didn't care. We had one man in our division, I won't give you his name, but he liked to gamble. And anytime he could get away or sneak away off, even on duty, he'd be down in the room where they ground up. They had a big garbage grinder thing in there that, you know, would do away with our scraps. And it had to be cleaned periodically. So he wanted to know if he couldn't get duty, being the man to take care of that. So I lost him out of the E Division, and he became our fixed garbage tender. And he could gamble all he wanted in between times.
Oh, that's what he did. That's why he wanted that duty.
That's why he wanted it.
You wonder what happened to a guy like that, you know.
Well,
Why, okay, so you got, let's put that down, and then home Christmas Day,
yes, sir.
Christmas Eve, Christmas Day. Well, then what happened to you? How old were you?
Wait just a minute.
Okay, you got home Christmas, are you ready? You got home Christmas Eve, and how old were you then?
Well, I would have been 22. I wouldn't be 23 till the 22nd of February coming, say so. I was well down the road on 22.
Yeah.
But I had told my folks, you know, I'm just going to lay around for a week before I look for a job. And about second or third day, I was getting pretty antsy. I went down and I happened to walk by the fire station. And of course, I'd known Bud Backus, the chief down there, quite a long time.
Sure.
And I stopped and visited with him. And he tells me about some place that this guy had an electric shop and he was looking for help. He says, "Why don't you go talk to him?" And I thought, well, yeah, I'll find him one of these days. I still had this idea that I wasn't going to work for a while. Well, about a day or two after that, I was ringing his doorbell. Found out his address, and he was out on a job someplace, so I went out to the job site and talked to him a few minutes, and he says, "When can you start?" And that put me back to work as a civilian. And there was things there I had to learn because I hadn't had the experience of the different fittings and things that they use in ordinary electrical work as compared to shipboard. Shipboard, everything is a waterproof gasket and a clamp, you know, and everything has to be watertight. But that didn't take long to catch on to, and he thought that the fact that I was capable of analyzing problems in electric motors and repairing them, that maybe we'd ought to open a motor shop.
Oh, that's where
And
that started.
So that's how it got me started into working motors. My first job was a I don't know, a 1/2 or 3/4 horse motor for the Fox Theater. That was the first.
Who were you? Who hired
This
you?
was the Register Electric.
Oh, Vern hired you.
Yeah, he was the one that hired me. And I worked there quite a long time, but I had to build, I could buy some of my equipment, like for making the coils, you know, to rewind a motor.
Right.
I had to build some of the forms to wind the coils on, and then there was commercial stuff available. If it wasn't too expensive, we'd buy it. If it was, we'd make it. So I got to where I could work anything from a fractional horse motor up through, well, 50 or 75 was about as big as I wanted to go at that time. And then as I went on through my career, I decided that motor work wasn't quite what I wanted, and that is this continuous repair stuff. And I took advantage there. The Shell Oil Company had a lot of leases in our area here when they started this little oil field. And one of their engineers came in the shop one day, and I don't know how he got my name, but he wanted to know if I'd come drive out or ride out with him to a lease and look at some of their equipment. And he opened up one of the control panels, and most of them were just weather tight, set out on a pole, you know. And he said, how long would it take you to change out a set of contacts in one of these, and some other questions. And it wasn't long till I was getting phone calls pretty near every day to go out and repair something in the oil patch someplace. Well, in other companies, it wasn't too long, I was doing work for all the majors that held leases around here, you know.
Yeah.
And a lot of windshield time involved. Some of them, I tried to stay within 100 miles of Sterling so I could get home, but some nights I'd be out all night. And I think the farthest I had was maybe one down in Kansas. I had to stay overnight when I worked down there. But most of those guys were wonderful people to work with. Plus, it wasn't just the people in the oil patch, the utility people that I had to work with, because they supplied the power. And if it involved any distribution or something like that, then I had to work with them, see. I didn't work on any of their stuff beyond the meter unless they asked me to. And that involved 5 different utilities in the area
here. Mm-hmm.
And like I say, those utility people were really nice people to work with.
Oh, that's good.
I enjoyed it. It got to where I was getting phone calls at the house. There was some, well, I worked with 3 different electricians here in Sterling, 3 different shops, but sometimes there'd be some little friction between them and the oil people, and they finally got to where they'd call me at home. They wouldn't even bother to call the shop.
Jump over to you.
Anytime after 5 o'clock in the morning, I could get a phone call. And so many times I would be, I would come in at night, clean out my truck and reload it for the next day, be on the road sometime between 5:30 and 6, headed out someplace in the boonies, anywhere from 50 to 100 miles to do a day's work. And it was a lot of variety.
Yeah,
The largest motor I got called on was 500 horse.
Wow.
And it ran on 1,500 volts. And
Where
then,
was that, for instance?
that was west of Marino at a tank battery, a big tank
Big
battery.
pump.
And then I had another one on a submersible pump that was 125 horse, down some 4,000 feet in the ground. And it started out at 1,500 volts. But see, you get your volt drop.
Going down the
So
line.
at the other end, it was about 480 volts when it got to the motor.
That big a drop.
Oh, yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah, those cables on the submersibles, they were a cluster of 3 with a waterproof armor around them, and then a metallic armor around that. And come on, great huge spools, you know.
Yeah, I know about supporting one of those. Anyway, okay. So how about your family? I mean,
Well, this worked out real good. During the time that I was, let's see, I was trying to mind, it was either towards the end of my boot camp training or shortly after I started in the school. My mother wanted to come out and visit with me, so I sent her enough money to get her transportation here and home, and she visited for 2 or 3 days, and I got to take her around and show her different things. First time she'd had her foot in the oceans, and she thought that was great. So she enjoyed that, and then I think it was the following year I got my father set up, and he came out and visited me. But then letters, of course, were all censored, you know, anything you
Right.
wrote, and you didn't get too much detail. But conversation, person to person, you could tell them anything you wanted to. But we enjoyed that. And
what'd your folks do?
my father got blowed off the farm in the Dust Bowl days,
30s,
so
yeah.
he went into concrete work. He was doing concrete work,
Contract.
and he'd hire 1 or 2 guys to work with him, depending on what the jobs were, and done that. One year I even, I don't know, his birthday was in September, and I thought, you know what, I'll make Dad a present for his birthday, so I sent him money to go deer hunting. I had an uncle that was going, and I wrote him and told him to pick Dad up. They went deer hunting, both come home with their deer, so he thought that was great.
Big time, huh? That's great. That's great. Yeah.
Yeah. But as far as the family, I was able to get letters to them often enough. Now, after I got on the ship, that was something else. You know, I mean, they didn't often hear from me. Once in a while, we'd be in a position where we could get mail to. There was in a convoy situation, it was generally a mail ship, and somehow, somewhere along the way, it might be a long delay, they would get to a port someplace where they could unload, and then the mail would go on its way.
Yeah.
So,
What about after the war? What about your family after the war and everything? Did you have a?
well, after the war, after I got home and started working, a year or 2 later, somehow I got married. So I started building a house, and still live in the house. But that was another interesting experience. And the family, part-time, they were in Sterling with us, and part-time they would be working out someplace else, you know.
Mhm.
And so we'd be telephones and letters and such to communicate, and weekends go see somebody if you had time or whatever. But we got along real good.
That's good.
And
Did you have any? You have sister Eileen, I know, because she's of my age.
yeah, I had 3 sisters. One of 'em-
Yeah, 3 sisters.
One of them died in '92, and 2 of them are still living.
Okay.
So that they.
I think you told us a great story. Are you
Well,
right? Are you right?
I hope you can do something with it.
Oh,
I
we'll-
just sit here and go on and on.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what we want. You did a great job, Odie. So we really appreciate it.